A story of blood, betrayal, and the American dream gone wrong. The red pickup truck was still running when Deputy Sheriff Marcus Hale pulled up to the loading dock behind Patterson and Sons Lumber Supply in Meridian, Mississippi. It was 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in late October, and the autumn fog had rolled in thick off the Chickasaw River, turning the industrial park into something out of a half-remembered nightmare. The truck's headlights cut twin beams through the mist, illuminating the figure slumped against the corrugated metal door. Marcus had been a deputy for 11 years. He'd seen hunting accidents, domestic disputes that turned violent, and once, a meth lab explosion that took out half a trailer park on County Road 9. But something about this scene made him slow his cruiser to a crawl and reach for the shotgun mounted beside him before he'd even fully processed what he was seeing. The figure wasn't slumped, it was posed. Elijah Patterson, 43 years old, former high school football star, current co-owner of the most successful lumber supply business in East Mississippi, sat with his back against the loading dock door, legs splayed in front of him like a discarded marionette. His Carhartt jacket was unzipped, and his thermal shirt beneath was dark with blood that had long since stopped flowing. His head tilted at an unnatural angle, resting against the metal door, and his eyes, those famous Patterson blue eyes that had graced billboards from Jackson to Mobile, stared at nothing. But it was his hands that made Marcus's breath catch. They were folded in his lap, fingers interlaced, holding a leather-bound ledger. The same ledger, Marcus would later learn, that had been at the center of a family dispute so vicious it had torn the Patterson clan apart over 3 generations. The same ledger that Elijah and his brother Silas had fought over since their father's funeral 6 years ago. The same ledger that, according to rumor around Meridian's coffee shops and courthouse hallways, contained secrets worth killing for. Marcus radioed it in, his voice steadier than he felt. "Dispatch, this is Unit 7. I need the coroner and crime scene unit at Patterson Lumber on Industrial Boulevard. We have a 1054 possible homicide. And tell them to step on it. He didn't touch the body. He didn't touch the ledger." But he stood there in the fog, watching the condensation form on the red pickup's hood. And he thought about the Patterson family. He thought about old man Jeremiah Patterson, who'd built the business from nothing in 1978, starting with a single chainsaw and a flatbed truck, working construction sites across Lauderdale County until his hands were permanently curled from gripping power tools. He thought about Jeremiah's wife, Dorothy, who'd kept the books and raised 3 boys while her husband chased the American dream. He thought about those 3 boys, Elijah, Silas, and the youngest, Thomas, and how the whole county had watched them grow from kids playing in lumber piles to men who couldn't stand to be in the same room together. And he thought about the rumors, the whispers that had started around the time of Jeremiah's death and never quite stopped. Money missing from the company accounts. Real estate deals that didn't make sense. A fire at the secondary warehouse in 2019 that insurance investigators had called suspicious but never proved arson. And always, always, the ledger. The ledger was Jeremiah Patterson's obsession. He'd kept it himself for decades, refusing to digitize, refusing to let anyone else touch it. "A man's business is his soul," he'd been fond of saying, usually after his 3rd bourbon at the American Legion Hall. "And you don't let nobody touch your soul." When Jeremiah died of a heart attack in his office in 2018, slumped over that same leather-bound book, ironically enough, the battle for control of Patterson and Sons had begun almost before his body was cold. Elijah, the oldest, had expected to step naturally into his father's role. Silas, the middle son, had other ideas, and Thomas, the baby of the family at 35, had tried to play peacemaker until even he was drawn into the conflict. Now Elijah was dead, and the ledger was in his hands, and Marcus Hale had a sick feeling that this was only the beginning. 2 weeks earlier, the boardroom of Patterson and Sons Lumber Supply smelled of sawdust and old money, a combination that Silas Patterson had always found perfectly American. The building itself was a monument to his father's success, a converted warehouse on the edge of Meridian's historic district, its exposed brick walls and timber beams carefully preserved to give visitors that authentic, built from the ground up feeling that played so well in the company's marketing materials. Silas sat at the head of the conference table, a position he'd claimed 6 years ago and refused to relinquish despite his brother's protests. At 41, he was 2 years younger than Elijah, but looked older. The stress of the family business carving lines around his eyes that no amount of golf at Northwood Country Club could smooth away. He wore a charcoal suit that cost more than most of his employees made in a month, and his silver tie clip, a gift from his father on his 30th birthday, caught the afternoon light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Across from him, Elijah slouched in his chair, dressed in jeans and a flannel shirt that hadn't seen an iron since the Clinton administration. His boots, steel-toed, scuffed, authentic, rested on the mahogany table, leaving faint marks that Silas would have to have polished out later. "Get your feet off the table," Silas said, not looking up from the quarterly reports. "Make me. I could. I own 51% of this company." "You claim you own 51%. Last time I checked, Dad's will said equal shares for all three of us." "Last time you checked was 6 years ago, brother. Things change, markets change, people change." Silas finally looked up, his eyes, identical to Elijah's in color but utterly different in temperature, meeting his brother's gaze. Or they don't change, and they end up sitting in boardrooms with mud on their boots, wondering why nobody respects them. Elijah's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath the stubble that he hadn't bothered to shave in 3 days. "You want to talk about respect? Let's talk about the Henderson account. You went behind my back and cut my commission by 15%. 15%, Silas. That's my kid's tuition for next semester. Your kid's tuition at Ole Miss, where he's majoring in partying and probably won't graduate anyway. Meanwhile, I've got real concerns. The lumber market is volatile. Tariffs on Canadian imports are killing our margins. And somebody—" Silas paused, letting the word hang in the air like smoke. "Has been diverting funds from the maintenance account into a private investment portfolio." The accusation hung between them, heavy and familiar. They'd been dancing around this particular topic for months, circling it like boxers feeling each other out before the first real punch. Elijah's feet came off the table, slowly, and he leaned forward, his calloused hands flat on the polished wood. "Are you accusing me of stealing from my own company?" "I'm accusing you of poor judgment. The investment portfolio is real. The transfers are documented. The question is whether you thought you were protecting family assets or padding your own retirement." "And the other question," Elijah said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "is whether you're manufacturing evidence to push me out. Just like you manufactured that emergency vote 6 years ago that gave you control. Just like you manufactured Dad's changed will that nobody else ever saw. The will was legitimate. The probate court certified it. The probate judge was your college roommate's father-in-law." Silas's smile was thin and sharp. "Connections matter in business, Elijah. That's something you never understood. Dad understood it. He built this company on relationships, on favors, on knowing whose palm to grease and when. You want to run a lumber yard like it's some kind of noble calling, some tribute to American craftsmanship. Dad knew better. He knew it's about money. It's always about money. Then where's the money, Silas? Elijah stood up, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. Because I look at our books, and I see revenues up 20% and profits down 10. I see contracts signed with companies that don't exist. I see real estate purchases in Baldwin County that have nothing to do with lumber. And I see you driving a new Mercedes every year, sending your kids to private schools in Atlanta, building a vacation home on the Gulf Coast that costs more than this entire building. Silas stood too, smoothing his tie with automatic precision. Are you suggesting I'm embezzling? I'm suggesting you're the one with the lifestyle that doesn't match our reported profits. I'm suggesting you've been using Dad's ledger to hide transactions that would make a CPA weep. And I'm suggesting... Elijah stopped, his chest heaving, his fists clenched at his sides. I'm suggesting that when I find proof, and I will find proof, you're going to wish you'd never been born a Patterson. Threats now, brother. How very Mississippi of you. Silas moved toward the door, pausing with his hand on the brass handle. Let me tell you something, Elijah. Dad's ledger is in the safe in my office. It has been since the day he died. And it stays there because I am the executor of this company and I am the keeper of its secrets. You want to see it? You want to audit our history? Take it to court. File a lawsuit. Spend your daughter's tuition money on lawyers instead of bourbon. But don't stand there in your dirty boots and pretend you understand anything about how this family works. He opened the door, then looked back, his expression almost pitying. Oh, and Elijah? The next time you want to accuse me of crimes, maybe don't do it in a room with security cameras. I do so love having evidence. Thomas Patterson hated conflict. This was a fact about himself that he'd accepted early in life, probably around age 7 when he'd hidden in the lumber piles rather than choose sides in one of his brother's endless competitions. He was the peacemaker, the compromiser, the one who suggested pizza when Elijah wanted burgers and Silas wanted steak. It was a role that had served him well for 35 years, allowing him to maintain relationships with both brothers, even as their rivalry curdled into something toxic. But standing in the kitchen of his modest ranch house in Collinsville, watching his wife Rebecca chop vegetables for dinner, Thomas felt the familiar weight of his position pressing down on him like a physical force. Silas called, he said, accepting the beer Rebecca handed him without looking at it. He wants me to sign some kind of affidavit. Says Elijah's been making threats, trying to force a buyout. He wants my support in a restraining order. Rebecca's knife paused mid-chop, the celery forgotten. And what did Elijah say when you talked to him? I haven't. He's not answering his phone. Thomas! Rebecca set down the knife and turned to face him. Her expression, that particular mixture of love and frustration that he'd become so familiar with over their 8 years of marriage. You can't keep playing both sides. This isn't a game. These are your brothers, yes, but they're also businessmen with lawyers and accountants and God knows what else. If Silas is talking about restraining orders, this has gone way beyond family squabbles. I know. Thomas took a long drink of the beer, barely tasting it. But what am I supposed to do? Pick a side? They're both my brothers. I love them both. Do you? Rebecca's voice was gentle but insistent. Do you really love them? Or do you just love the idea of having a family? Because from where I'm standing, Elijah treats you like an afterthought, and Silas treats you like a pawn. When's the last time either of them called just to see how you were doing? When's the last time they came to one of your daughter's soccer games? When's the last time they acted like family instead of competitors? Thomas didn't answer. He couldn't. Because Rebecca was right, and they both knew it. The Patterson family had fractured long ago, the cracks papered over by holiday gatherings where nobody spoke to each other and summer barbecues that ended in arguments over charcoal brands. The only thing that had held them together was Jeremiah, and Jeremiah had been dead for 6 years. "I keep thinking about Dad," Thomas said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "About the last time I saw him alive. He called me into his office, the week before he died. He made me promise something." Rebecca moved closer, her hand finding his on the counter. "What kind of promise?" "He made me promise that if anything ever happened to him, I'd protect the ledger. Not Elijah, not Silas, me. He said I was the only one he could trust." Thomas laughed, a bitter sound that surprised even him. "Me, the baby, the one who never wanted anything to do with the business. He said I had clean hands, and that clean hands were what the ledger needed." What did he mean by that? I don't know. I thought he was being dramatic. Dad was always dramatic, especially after a few drinks. But now, Thomas trailed off, staring at nothing. "Now I think he knew something was coming. Maybe not a heart attack specifically, but something. He knew Elijah and Silas would tear each other apart over that company, and he wanted me to be the one to stop it." "Can you?" "I don't know, but I think I have to try." The Patterson family history was Mississippi history, intertwined with the state's economic booms and busts like oak roots in river clay. Jeremiah's father, Amos Patterson, had been a sharecropper in Neshoba County during the Depression, working land he would never own until he finally walked away in 1947. Bought a used truck with his accumulated savings, and started hauling timber for the lumber mills sprouting up across the Pine Belt. Jeremiah grew up in that truck, learning to count by tallying board feet, learning to read by studying freight manifests. By the time he was 25, he'd saved enough to buy his own small sawmill outside of Meridian, and by 40, he'd expanded into a full-service lumber supply that served contractors from Tupelo to the Gulf Coast. He married Dorothy Whitfield, a banker's daughter from Jackson who'd fallen in love with his ambition, if not his manners, and together they built something that passed for an empire in East Mississippi. The 3 boys came in quick succession: Elijah in 1981, Silas in 1983, Thomas in 1989. And from the beginning, Jeremiah made them part of the business. Elijah worked the yard from age 12, loading trucks and learning inventory. Silas sat in on meetings from age 10, absorbing the art of the deal. Thomas, the surprise baby, was given lighter duties, often kept in the office with his mother, learning bookkeeping and customer service, while his brothers competed for their father's attention in the dirt and sawdust. The rivalry was inevitable, perhaps even encouraged. Jeremiah believed in competition, in the American ideal that the best man rose to the top through hard work and determination. He pitted his sons against each other in everything: grades, sports, sales numbers, customer satisfaction scores. He rewarded winners with praise and opportunity, and he punished losers with silence and extra shifts. It was, he told himself, preparation for the real world. It was, his sons would later realize, a recipe for disaster. Elijah excelled at the physical side of the business. He could estimate a lumber order by sight, tell you the grade of pine by smell, and charm a contractor out of a bad mood with a joke and a firm handshake. He was his father's son in all the ways that mattered on the job site. Tough, fair, relentless. But he lacked patience for paperwork, for the endless negotiations with suppliers and bankers that kept a company afloat. He wanted to build things, to see the tangible results of his labor, and he resented the time spent in offices and conference rooms. Silas was the opposite. He had no interest in getting his hands dirty, but he had a gift for numbers and an instinct for deal-making that bordered on precognition. He could read a balance sheet like a novel, spotting weaknesses and opportunities that others missed. He cultivated relationships with politicians and bankers, joined the right clubs, and attended the right churches, built the network that his father had always talked about but never quite mastered. He was, by any objective measure, the better businessman. Thomas was neither and both. He understood the physical work because he'd done it, but he preferred the office. He grasped the financial side because his mother had taught him, but he lacked Silas's killer instinct. He was competent at everything, exceptional at nothing, and utterly invisible in the competition between his brothers. This should have made him the natural compromise candidate, the bridge between two extremes. Instead, it made him irrelevant. The breaking point came in 2012, when Jeremiah suffered his first minor heart attack and began talking seriously about succession. Elijah expected to be named president. He was the oldest, the most experienced, the heir apparent. Silas expected to be named CEO. He was the smartest, the most profitable, the future of the company. Neither was willing to accept a subordinate role to the other. Jeremiah, in his infinite wisdom, split the difference. He created co-presidencies, with Elijah in charge of operations and Silas in charge of finance and development. It was a disaster from day one. Every decision required consensus, and consensus was impossible when both men fundamentally disagreed about the company's direction. Elijah wanted to expand slowly, organically, building on their reputation for quality and service. Silas wanted to leverage their assets, acquire competitors, and become a regional powerhouse. They fought over everything: inventory levels, employee hiring, marketing budgets, office paint colors. Thomas watched from his position as Vice President of Customer Relations, powerless to stop the slow-motion train wreck. He mediated when he could, avoided confrontation when he couldn't, and tried to keep the company functioning despite his brother's dysfunction. It was exhausting, demoralizing, and ultimately futile. When Jeremiah died in 2018, the will, at least the version that Silas produced, gave Silas controlling interest, with Elijah and Thomas as minority partners. Elijah challenged it immediately, claiming the original will had divided everything equally. The probate court, after a brief and suspiciously smooth process, sided with Silas. Elijah never accepted the verdict, and the Cold War that followed made the previous years look like a honeymoon. And through it all, the ledger remained. Jeremiah's personal record, his private accounting of the company's history, his secrets and sins committed to paper in his own cramped handwriting. Silas claimed it as part of his controlling interest. Elijah demanded access as his right as a son and shareholder. Thomas, who had promised to protect it, had never even seen it. Until now. The safe in Silas's office was a Brinks model installed in 2015 after a break-in at the main warehouse that had cost the company nearly $50,000 in stolen power tools. It was digital, with a 6-digit code that Silas changed monthly and shared with no one. The ledger had occupied its bottom shelf since 2018, untouched except for the occasional moment when Silas would open the safe, stare at the leather binding, and close it again without removing the book. Thomas knew this because he'd watched his brother perform this ritual dozens of times over the past 6 years. He'd never asked about it, never pressed the issue of his father's promise. He'd told himself that Silas was the executor, that the ledger was company property, that his own role was to maintain peace rather than pursue justice. But peace was dead now, buried under years of accumulated grievance and suspicion. And Thomas was tired of being invisible. He waited until Thursday evening, when Silas always left early for his standing tea time at Northwood. The office building was nearly empty, the administrative staff gone home, the warehouse crew finishing their shift. Thomas used his key, still valid despite his diminished role, a small oversight that Silas would certainly correct if he ever thought about it, and let himself into his brother's corner office. The safe beeped when he touched it, demanding its code. Thomas didn't know the code. He'd never known it, but he knew Silas, knew his brother's habits and tics, his tendency to use significant dates and obvious patterns. He tried Silas's birthday. Nothing. He tried his wedding anniversary. Nothing. He tried his children's birthdays in sequence. Nothing. On his 5th attempt, the safe beeped angrily and locked down for 15 minutes. Thomas sat in Silas's leather chair, his father's chair before him, and waited, his heart hammering against his ribs, his shirt damp with sweat despite the office's aggressive air conditioning. When the lockout expired, he tried again. This time he thought about Jeremiah, about the man who'd raised 3 competitive sons and never quite understood the monster he'd created. What would Jeremiah have used? What code would matter to him? Thomas entered 070478. July 4th, 1978, the date Amos Patterson had bought his first truck, the date Jeremiah always cited as the beginning of everything. The safe clicked open. The ledger was smaller than Thomas expected, maybe 8 by 10 inches. Maybe 200 pages bound in leather that had gone soft and dark with age and handling. He lifted it out carefully, almost reverently, and carried it to the desk. The first page was dated January 1st, 1978, in his father's youthful handwriting. This book contains the true record of Patterson and Sons lumber supply. The numbers in the official books are for the government and the banks. The numbers in this book are for me. Some things a man needs to keep to himself. Some things are nobody's business but his own. Thomas turned the page, and the world began to tilt. The entries were meticulous, detailed, and devastating. Jeremiah had recorded everything. The legitimate business transactions, yes, but also the side deals, the payoffs, the tax evasion that had funded the company's early growth. He documented bribes to county officials for favorable zoning, kickbacks to contractors for exclusive supply agreements, and a systematic underreporting of income that had saved hundreds of thousands in taxes over 3 decades. But that was just the beginning. As Thomas read further, moving through the 80s and 90s, he found darker entries, payments to men with no names, only initials, references to the Collinsville situation and the Hattiesburg problem. A detailed accounting of the 1994 warehouse fire that had netted the company a $2.3 million insurance payout, along with Jeremiah's private note. Accident arranged. Nobody hurt. Money needed for expansion. Thomas's hands shook as he turned to the later entries, the ones from the 2000s when his brothers had joined the business. Here the tone changed, became more personal, more confessional. Jeremiah wrote about Elijah's drinking in his 20s, the DUI that had been covered up with a $10,000 payment to a state trooper. He wrote about Silas's gambling debts from his college years, the $87,000 that Jeremiah had quietly paid to keep his son's creditors from breaking his legs. He wrote about Dorothy's cancer in 2015, the experimental treatments in Houston that had cost $400,000 and failed anyway, the money diverted from company accounts and hidden as consulting fees. And then, in the final entries from 2018, he wrote about his son's rivalry with a clarity that made Thomas's chest ache. They hate each other now. I made them hate each other. I thought competition would make them strong, but I made them monsters instead. Elijah is honest but stupid. Silas is smart but corrupt. Neither can run this company alone, and together they will destroy it. I have tried to teach them, to show them that family matters more than profit, but they are deaf to everything except their own grievance. The ledger is my sin. I kept secrets to protect them, and the secrets have become weapons. I am dying. I know I am dying. And I do not know how to save my sons from themselves. The final entry was dated 3 days before Jeremiah's death. Thomas came to see me today. He brought his daughter, little Sarah, and we talked about nothing important. Soccer practice, school, the weather. He did not ask about the business. He did not ask about the will. He asked about my health, and he listened when I talked about his mother, and he reminded me that some things matter more than money. He has clean hands. He always had clean hands. I will give him the ledger when the time comes. He is the only one who can bear its weight. Thomas closed the book, his vision blurred, his throat tight with grief and something else. Something that felt like anger or maybe betrayal. All these years he'd thought his father had ignored him, dismissed him as the weak one, the unimportant one. But Jeremiah had seen him clearly, had valued his decency even as he'd driven his other sons toward destruction, and then he'd broken his own promise. He'd died with a ledger in his hands, and Silas had claimed it, and the secret that was supposed to save the family had become the weapon that would destroy it. Thomas knew what he had to do. He couldn't give the ledger to Elijah. It would fuel his brother's rage, provide evidence for lawsuits and criminal charges that would destroy everything Jeremiah had built. He couldn't leave it with Silas. It was already being used as a tool of control, a symbol of power that corrupted everything it touched. He had to destroy it, burn every page, erase every secret, free his family from the weight of their father's sins. But even as he thought this, he knew it was too late. The secrets were out there, embedded in the company's history, in the memories of employees and contractors and officials who'd taken bribes. Destroying the ledger wouldn't change the past. It would only ensure that the truth came out in ways nobody could control. He needed help. He needed someone who could look at this objectively, who could help him navigate the legal and financial minefield that the ledger represented. He needed. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. I know you have the book. We need to talk. Loading dock. Midnight. Come alone. Thomas stared at the message, his blood running cold. He hadn't been careful. He'd used his key, sat in Silas's chair, opened the safe. There were cameras everywhere, of course. Silas had probably been watching from the golf course, or had alerts set up, or had simply noticed the disturbed dust on the safe's keypad. However he'd known, he knew, and now Thomas had a choice. He could return the ledger to the safe, pretend he'd never seen it, and continue his feudal role as family peacemaker. Or he could meet his brother, hear what he had to say, and try one last time to find a solution that didn't end in destruction. He looked at the ledger, at his father's cramped handwriting covering decades of American ambition and American sin. Then he tucked the book under his arm, turned off the office lights, and walked out into the Mississippi night. The loading dock behind the main warehouse was exactly what you'd expect from a 70-year-old lumber company in the Deep South. A concrete platform stained with decades of oil and sap, overhead doors that rattled in the wind, security lights that flickered and buzzed and cast everything in shades of amber and shadow. Thomas arrived at 11:45, 15 minutes early, his nerves stretched tight as piano wire. He wasn't surprised to find Elijah already there, leaning against his red pickup with a flask in his hand and a look on his face that Thomas had never seen before. His oldest brother looked broken, not angry, not defiant, but genuinely, fundamentally broken, as if some essential structure inside him had finally collapsed under too much weight. "Silas isn't coming," Elijah said, not looking at him. "I sent the text." Thomas felt the ground shift beneath his feet. "You?" "I've been watching Silas's office for months. Cameras, keyloggers, the whole paranoid toolkit. I know every time he opens that safe. I know the code he uses. And I know that tonight, for the first time in 6 years, someone else opened it." Elijah finally turned, and his eyes, those famous Patterson eyes, were red-rimmed and desperate. "You have the ledger, Tommy. I know you do, and I need you to give it to me." "Elijah, don't give me that peacemaker bullshit. I've heard it my whole life, and I'm done with it." Elijah pushed off the truck, moving closer, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "You know what's in that book. You know what Silas has been holding over me. The DUI, the drinking, the consulting fees that Dad paid to keep me out of prison. He's been using it to control me, to cut me out of my own family's business. And now I find out Dad wanted you to have it? You who never even wanted to be involved. That's not... Dad wanted me to protect it, not use it. He wanted to control us from the grave." Elijah's voice cracked, and he took a long drink from the flask, his hand trembling. That's all he ever wanted. Control, competition. He made us what we are, Tommy. He made me the failure and Silas the success and you the goddamn mascot. And now he's dead, and we're still dancing to his tune, and I am done. Thomas backed up, his shoulder blades hitting the corrugated metal wall. "What are you going to do?" "Expose everything, every bribe, every payoff, every dirty deal that built this company. I'll take it to the IRS, to the FBI, to the Meridian Star, and every TV station from here to New Orleans. I'll burn it all down, Silas with it, and maybe..." Elijah laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "Maybe then I'll finally be free. You'll destroy yourself too. The DUI, the drinking, your own part in the company. You think they'll believe you were innocent? I don't care. I don't care about any of it anymore. The business, the money, the family name. It's all poisoned, Tommy. It's all rotten from the inside. The only question is whether you want to be standing in the wreckage or buried under it." Thomas looked at his brother, really looked at him, and saw the truth that he'd been avoiding for years. Elijah wasn't just angry. He wasn't just jealous or bitter or competitive. He was suicidal, and this destruction of everything they'd built, was his chosen method. "Give me the ledger," Elijah said, holding out his hand. "Or I'll take it. I don't want to hurt you, Tommy. You're the only one who never treated me like dirt, but I will take it." Thomas clutched the book tighter, his mind racing. He couldn't give it to Elijah. His brother would follow through on his threats, and the destruction would be total. He couldn't keep it. Elijah was bigger, stronger, and clearly past the point of reason. He needed time, needed to think, needed. The gunshot was impossibly loud in the confined space of the loading dock, a thunderclap that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Elijah's eyes went wide, his mouth opening in a surprised "oh" that made no sound. He looked down at his chest, at the dark stain spreading across his flannel shirt, and then he looked past Thomas, toward the shadows at the edge of the security light's reach. "Silas," he whispered, but Thomas was already turning, already seeing the figure step forward from the darkness, and his heart stopped in his chest because it wasn't Silas. It was someone else entirely, someone he never would have expected, someone who had no business being here with a gun in their hand. "Rebecca?" Thomas's voice sounded like it belonged to someone else, someone very far away. Why?" His wife lowered the smoking pistol, her face calm and composed in a way that was more terrifying than any scream could have been. "I'm sorry, Thomas. I truly am. But some things can't be fixed with talking." Elijah slid down the wall, leaving a smear of blood on the corrugated metal. He tried to speak, but only blood came out, bubbling from his lips. His eyes found Thomas's, held them for a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity. And then the light went out of them. Thomas fell to his knees, the ledger slipping from his fingers, his world contracting to the impossible fact of his brother's body, his wife's gun, his own failure to see what had been right in front of him. "I didn't want to," Rebecca said. And for the first time, Thomas heard something like regret in her voice. "I tried to find another way. I really did. But Elijah was going to destroy everything, and Silas was going to let him, and you—" She laughed, a sound almost as broken as Elijah's had been. "You were going to let them both win. You were going to burn the ledger and hope for the best, and that wasn't good enough." "Good enough for what?" Thomas's voice was a croak, barely human. "What are you talking about?" Rebecca picked up the ledger, brushing dirt from its leather cover with a tenderness that made Thomas's stomach turn. "Your father wasn't the only one with secrets, Thomas. Your mother had them too. Dorothy Whitfield Patterson, the banker's daughter, the perfect wife, the woman who kept the books and raised the children and never complained. She was also the woman who embezzled $400,000 from her father's bank in 1982 to cover Jeremiah's gambling debts. She was the woman who arranged the 1994 fire because the insurance money was the only way to keep the company from bankruptcy. She was the woman who made your father what he became, and he never knew. He thought he was the mastermind, the self-made man. He never realized that Dorothy was the one pulling the strings. Thomas stared at her, his mind refusing to process what he was hearing. Mom died of cancer. She was a good person. She was a survivor. She did what she had to do to protect her family, just like I'm doing now." Rebecca tucked the ledger under her arm, the gun still loose in her other hand. "I found her letters after we got married. She'd left them with a lawyer in Jackson, instructions to deliver them to the youngest son's wife after her death. She knew Thomas. She knew what would happen to this family. She wanted someone to have the truth, someone who could use it to protect what matters." "Protect what? Elijah's dead. You just killed my brother." "I protected the company. I protected the employees and the contracts and the legacy that your parents built. Elijah was going to destroy all of it, and Silas was too weak to stop him. so I did what needed to be done." Rebecca's voice hardened, the regret giving way to something colder. "And now you're going to help me finish it." "Finish what?" "Silas has to go. He's the only one left who knows about the ledger, who knows what it contains. With Elijah dead and the ledger in my control, I can manage Silas. But not forever. Eventually, he'll realize what happened and he'll come for me. Unless—" She looked at Thomas, and for a moment he saw something almost like love in her eyes. "Unless you help me. Unless we do this together, like your parents did, like Dorothy wanted." Thomas looked at Elijah's body, at the blood pooling on the concrete, at the flask still clutched in his brother's dead hand. He thought about his mother, about the woman who'd taught him bookkeeping and kindness, who'd seemed so gentle and so strong. He thought about his father, about the man who'd built an empire on secrets and sin and called it the American dream. He thought about Silas, about the brother who'd manipulated and controlled and probably deserved whatever was coming to him. And he thought about himself, about the peacemaker who'd never made peace, the compromiser who'd never found compromise, the invisible son who'd finally been seen by his father only to be burdened with an impossible choice. "I can't," he whispered. "I can't do this, Rebecca. I can't be part of this." "You already are." She held out the gun, handle first. "Your fingerprints are on the flask. Your key was used to enter the office. Your wife shot your brother while you watched. You're already part of it, Thomas. The only question is whether you fight it or finish it." Thomas looked at the gun. He looked at his brother. He looked at his wife, this woman he'd loved for 8 years. This woman who'd carried his child and shared his bed and planned his future. And he realized that he didn't know her at all. Maybe he'd never known her. Maybe he'd never known anyone, including himself. "Silas," he said finally. "Where is he?" "At his house. I told him there was an emergency at the warehouse, that Elijah was threatening to burn the inventory. He'll be here soon. And when he arrives—" Rebecca pressed the gun into Thomas's hand, her fingers warm and steady against his cold, shaking ones. "When he arrives, you'll be waiting. You'll tell him Elijah attacked you, that you struggled, that the gun went off. You'll be grief-stricken, horrified, a man who defended himself against his own brother. And I'll back you up, every word. And then we'll have the ledger, and we'll have control, and we'll build something better. Something clean, something that doesn't depend on secrets and sin." Rebecca's voice softened, became almost pleading. "Isn't that what you wanted, Thomas? Clean hands? A fresh start? This is how we get it. This is the only way." Thomas felt the gun's weight in his hand, the cold metal against his palm, the impossible choice pressing down on him like physical gravity. He thought about his daughter, Sarah, asleep in her bed in Collinsville, unaware that her world was ending. He thought about the employees who'd worked for Patterson and Sons for decades, who'd built lives and families around this company. He thought about the American dream, about the promise that hard work and decency would be rewarded, that the good guys would win and the bad guys would be punished. And he thought about reality, about the Mississippi night and the blood on the concrete and the ledger that contained everything and explained nothing. "Okay," he said, and his voice was steady now, steady and empty. "I'll do it." Rebecca smiled, and for a moment she looked like the woman he'd married, the woman who'd laughed at his jokes and held his hand through his father's funeral and promised to love him forever. "I knew you would. I always knew you were stronger than you seemed." She kissed him, her lips warm and tasting of copper and something else, something bitter and chemical that made his head spin. He stumbled, the gun falling from his hand, and he saw her catch it, saw her step back, saw her face transform from loving wife to something else entirely. Rebecca? His tongue felt thick, his vision blurring. What did you— Your mother's letters? She said, her voice coming from very far away. They also mentioned that Dorothy had developed quite a talent for chemistry during her cancer treatments. She learned which drugs interacted badly, which combinations could be fatal, which substances left no trace. She passed that knowledge to me, along with everything else. Rebecca watched him fall, her expression almost curious. I'm sorry, Thomas. I really am. But you were never strong enough. You would have broken eventually. You would have confessed or compromised or found some way to turn this into another of your failed peace offerings. And I can't have that. The ledger needs someone who can protect it. Someone who understands that power requires sacrifice. Thomas hit the concrete, his cheek pressing against the cold surface, his eyes level with Elijah's dead gaze. He tried to speak, to move, to fight, but his body wouldn't respond. He could only watch as Rebecca stepped over him, the ledger under one arm, the gun in her other hand, and walked toward the sound of tires on gravel. Silas's Mercedes pulled into the lot, headlights sweeping across the loading dock, illuminating the scene in stark, merciless detail. Thomas heard the car door open, heard his brother's footsteps, heard Silas's voice rise in shock, and then cut off with the second gunshot of the night. Then there was only silence, and the smell of blood and sawdust, and the slow, inevitable darkness closing in. Deputy Marcus Hale found the scene 3 hours later, after a passing trucker reported seeing a body on the loading dock. By then, Rebecca Patterson was gone, along with the ledger and her husband's car. The Mercedes was still there. Silas's body slumped across the front seat, a single bullet hole in his temple. Elijah remained where he'd fallen, and Thomas, barely alive, poisoned but not dead, was rushed to Anderson Regional Medical Center in critical condition. The investigation that followed would become one of the most notorious cases in Mississippi history, a true crime sensation that generated podcasts, documentaries, and endless speculation. But the truth, the full truth, would never be known. Not by the police, not by the public, not by the surviving members of the Patterson family who would spend the rest of their lives trying to understand how everything had gone so wrong. Rebecca Patterson was never found. The ledger was never recovered. The money that Silas had allegedly embezzled, nearly $3 million by the time accountants finished their audit, vanished with her, along with whatever secrets Jeremiah and Dorothy had committed to its pages. Thomas survived, barely. The poison had damaged his heart, his liver, his nervous system. He spent 6 months in the hospital, another year in physical therapy, and the rest of his life in a wheelchair. His body broken, but his mind tragically, mercilessly intact. He never spoke about that night, never offered testimony or explanation, never confirmed or denied the theories that swirled around him like vultures around carrion. He died in 2024 in a nursing home in Jackson, alone except for a daughter who visited once a year, and a nurse who read to him from history books because he'd developed a fascination with the fall of empires. His last words, recorded by that same nurse, were, "She was right about one thing. Power does require sacrifice. She just never understood what she was sacrificing." The Patterson and Sons Lumber Supply Company was sold at bankruptcy auction in 2020. Its assets scattered among competitors, its name forgotten within a decade. The warehouse on Industrial Boulevard was demolished in 2025, replaced by a strip mall that included a payday loan center, a vape shop, and a storefront church that promised salvation to anyone who walked through its doors. If you drive past that strip mall today, on your way to somewhere else, somewhere better, you might notice a small historical marker near the parking lot entrance. It was paid for by a local history society, funded by a grant from a foundation that no longer exists, and it reads, "On this site stood Patterson and Sons Lumber Supply, founded 1978. A family business that embodied the American dream of hard work and success. May its memory remind us that dreams, like families, require care to survive." The marker doesn't mention the ledger. It doesn't mention the blood. It doesn't mention Rebecca Patterson, or the 3 million, or the 3 brothers who grew up playing in lumber piles and died in violence and betrayal. It doesn't mention that the American dream, for the Patterson family, became an American nightmare, built on secrets and sustained by sin until the weight of it all finally collapsed. But if you stand there at night, when the payday loan center is closed and the vape shop is dark, and the storefront church's neon cross flickers against the Mississippi sky, you might feel something. A chill, perhaps, or a sense of presence, of history pressing against the present like a memory trying to surface. You might hear, in the wind that blows across the empty parking lot, the echo of 3 boys laughing as they play in sawdust before they learn to compete, before they learn to hate, before they became what their father made them. And if you're very quiet and very still, you might hear something else. The sound of pages turning in a leather-bound book. The sound of a woman walking away into darkness, carrying secrets that will never be told. The sound of an American dream dying, not with a bang, but with a whisper, fading into the night like fog off the Chickasaw River, leaving nothing behind but a marker that nobody reads and a story that nobody believes. Closing note. Thank you for staying with us through this dark journey into the heart of an American family. If this story moved you, shocked you, or made you think twice about the person sitting across from you at Thanksgiving dinner, then we've done our job. Good luck out there. And remember, sometimes the greatest monsters wear the faces we love most. Be sure to stay on this channel and hit that subscribe button for more gripping American stories that will keep you up at night. Until next time, sleep tight, and maybe check your locks twice.